Hi there. Uh, this is your man, Afro Perspectives. I'm going to talk about how in the mid 1880s most African kingdoms lost their independence and became colonies of major European powers. So I've got my map of Africa in 1880, just on the eve of the Berlin Conference, which partitioned Africa into various European colonies. So in 1880, Europeans controlled just about 10% of Africa, and it was mostly territories on the coast. So I'm going to show you what the extent of European rule in Africa in 1880. So on the southern coast of Africa, you had the Cape Colony, which was held by the British, and then you had Freetown in Sierra Leone, forts along the coast of Gambia here, and the presence at Lagos, and then you had the Gold Coast Protectorate, and yeah, then you had France. France had colonies in Saint Louis in Senegal, and then settlements at Dakar in what is now yep, Senegal again, and then we had the possessions of Assini, Grand Bassam, regions of Cote d'Ivoire, what is now the known as Ivory Coast in English, and then you had the protectorate of Dahomey, now Benin, and France had, as long back as 1830, had begun the colonization of Algeria. That's right at the top of North Africa. And then Portugal had colonies on the western seaboard, just near the Atlantic, and you had Angola. That's the green tiny bit of land here. And then the Portuguese arrived in Angola in 1482, and then they retook the port of Luanda from the Dutch in 1648, and then in Mozambique, that is what is known as Portuguese East Africa. They first arrived here in 1498, and then created trading posts by as early as 1505, and then the Spanish had what they called Queta and Melilla. That's these tiny bits of land here, right on the coast of Morocco, and then you had the Egypt. That's this green bit of land here, and that was controlled by the Ottoman Turks. So you had Egypt here, and then you had Tunisia and Libya. So that's the extent of colonial holdings in Africa in 1880 on the eve of the Berlin Conference. So one might want to ask why the European powers decided to partition Africa amongst themselves. The chief reason was that there was demand for commodities such as gold and timber and rubber after the Industrial Revolution that had just taken place in Europe. So gold was especially in demand during this point in time, and you had the Witwatersrand gold rush, which started in 1886 in areas around Johannesburg in South Africa. So that was the demand for resources being a catalyst for colonization of Africa. Then you had issues of racial superiority, and you had some European groups. They believed that other ethnic groups or races, Europeans, well, they are basically have the mission to civilize what they refer to as inferior races, and it was believed that people of European descent are biologically more superior to other people from around the world, and it was the white man's burden uh, to civilize the indigenous African people. So you had people like Henry Morton Stanley here, and Stanley. He was responsible for spreading the Christian religion, and Europeans believed that promoted Christianity as a superior religion to those to the beliefs of indigenous Africans. And you had people like Robert Moffat in South Africa, and Rhodesia, what is now Zimbabwe, and then you have David Livingstone in Central Africa. So that was the role played by religion in acting as a justification for the colonization of Africa. Well, you had technology, and as we have seen before, the industrialization had resulted in advantages such as steam trains, and railroads, which facilitated European penetration into the interior. There were medical advances such as the invention of quinine, which enabled Europeans to move into tropical Africa, where they could not do so before because of diseases like malaria and yellow fever. Yeah, that's a bottle of quinine here, and this one was made by Barrows and Barrows Wellcome and Company in London, and that's what it looked like in the 1880s when Europeans were conquering Africa. And then you had the Maxim gun. The Maxim gun was this is what it looked like, and the Maxim gun was one advance from the Industrial Revolution. It gave Europeans military advantage over African armies. For instance, it could fire 600 rounds per minute, and it gave Europeans a vast military advantage over the Africans. And basically, Africans were fighting with spears and shields. This is what the African armies of the time looked like, and basically had shields and spears, and they were fighting against European armies with artillery and Maxim guns, so they really stood no chance. And so that was the industrial advances acting as a catalyst for European colonization of Africa. And then the other issue was strategic rival competition amongst European powers, which they were basically competing against each other to amass as much territory as they could in Africa. Yeah. So you had in Southern Africa, you had the Germans and the British competing to acquire land, as well as the Portuguese. Yeah. So the European powers, there were 14 of them. They decided to convene a conference in Berlin from 15th of November 1884 to the 26th of February 1885. That's a pictorial depiction of the 14 powers at the Berlin conference. And what they agreed on was that the European powers had to end slavery by Islamic traders and Africans themselves. And say in Central Africa, you had Tipu Tip and the Swahili traders from the East Coast, and and then the other the 14 powers, what they agreed was that there was to be free trade on the Congo River and then on Lake Malawi, and and then the key agreement of the Berlin Conference was that principle of effective occupation, which required that for European power to actually claim that it possessed a colony, it had to sign a treaty with the local leaders, the local chiefs, and then fly its flag over to the territory, and then established a police force to administer the colony. So, but the principle of effective occupation was disputed by Britain and France, who accused Germany of trying to embarrass other European powers into giving up their possessions on the African continent because they could not show a strong presence. So Britain had large territorial holdings and wanted to keep administrative costs to a minimum, and the European powers they finally agreed that all a European power needed to do was to show that it had established some kind of a base on the coast from which it was able to expand into the interior. The the aftermath of the Berlin Conference was that the European powers managed to partition Africa amongst themselves. So you had the British in Southern Africa. They had the Union of South Africa, Bechuanaland, which was now the modern country of Botswana, Southern Rhodesia here, modern country, and now the modern country of Zimbabwe, Northern Rhodesia, now the Zambia. So yeah, this was all British possessions by 1913, on the eve of World War I. And then you had the Germans were in Southwest Africa, now Namibia, and the Portuguese had expanded their territories into consolidated into a country, Mozambique, and you had the Portuguese again in Angola, and that's the major position Portugal had. And then you had territories of Portuguese in West Africa. I think that's Guinea-Bissau. Then you had the Germans. They also had the Cameroons. And then you had the French. They got all these massive amounts of territory in West Africa. You had Mauritania, Algeria, Morocco, and the parts of here, what they called Senegal and Niger and Chad. And then you had the British again in North Africa. They had Egypt, Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, which is now the modern country of Sudan. Then you had Uganda, and then across here they had King Leopold II and the Congo Free State until 1908, when we were taken over by the Belgian by the Belgian state after an outcry in Europe over the abuses that were inflicted on the Congolese by King Leopold. And then you have Uganda and British East Africa. These were all British possessions. Ethiopia was never colonized, and except for a brief period in 1935 when the Italians invaded. Then the Italians themselves, they had Somaliland, and then they had Eritrea, and then Libya. So that was the extent of African colonization by World War, by 1913, just before World War I. And so colonization was actually a fact of life for Africans. And Emmanuel Macron, when he was president, when he was campaigning for the French presidents, referred to colonization as a crime against humanity, and called for other European powers to apologize for their role in Africa. And what he went on to say that colonization was genuinely barbaric and constitutes part of our past that we have to confront, and also by apologizing to those against whom we committed these acts. France had installed human rights in Algeria, but has simply forgotten to read them. Yes, so that was Emmanuel Macron acknowledging the dark past that colonization was. So, for instance, in the Congo Free State, King Leopold, yes, that's King Leopold, yeah. King Leopold, King Leopold was extracting rubber, and this resulted in the deaths of about 10 million Congolese through killings, famine, and disease. And then the Congo Free State was basically a massive labor camp, and King Leopold made a fortune for himself with the harvest of wild rubber. And then the atrocity committed by King Leopold, it involved the chopping of hands and chopping of feet for those who resisted offering their labor to the King Leopold's officials. So you can see how barbaric it was. That this is a picture of young girls. They're basically like 13, 14 years old, as you can see in the picture, and with their hands chopped off. Yeah, that was King Leopold rule in the Congo Free State before it was handed over to the Belgian state in 1908, and So and then the French, especially in places like Central African Republic, the Republic of Congo, and Chad, they used the slave labor to build things like railway lines, and so that was France during it. In early colonial days, and then the Germans carried out the first genocide of the in the late 1890s. They rounded up General Lothar von Trotter's forces between 1904 and 1907. They rounded up the Herero and Nama ethnic group who resisted German rule, and they used concentration camps where those incarcerated were subjected to inhumane conditions. For instance, out of every 100 people who were sent to the concentration camps, 74 of those lost their lives, and that's a pictorial depiction of like Germans with chains around. With Namibians with chains around their necks, chained up, and just left to die in concentration camps. Yeah. So and then, as we have seen, Emmanuel Macron has called for colonization a crime against humanity, and that was on the 14th of February 2017 when he was campaigning for the French presidency. And of course, the message got to other major European powers, and in 2021, Germany's foreign minister Heiko Maas apologized for the railway and Namaka atrocities and promised reparations, a fund of 1.3 billion in reconstruction and development. Yeah, so that's Germany apologizing for its role in the slaughter of railway Namaka tribes people in Namibia. So the Germans actually apologized, and then you had King Philip of Belgium. He actually went to Kinshasa but he just expressed his deepest regrets for the abuses of his ancestors. King Leopold II of Belgium in the Congo Free State. That's King Philippe and Queen Mathilde, and that's Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi. And King Philippe reaffirmed his deepest regrets for colonial abuses in the DRC, but stopped short of formally apologizing. Yeah, that's the regime. This regime, meaning the regime of King Leopold was of unequal relations and justifiable in itself, marked by paternalism, discrimination, and racism. So it's an acknowledgement of how barbaric and how cruel colonialism was. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching the presentation. If you found this presentation useful, please drop a comment or subscribe to my channel. Thank you.